older brother, Super Mario Bros. The Lost Level, also known as Super Mario Bros. For Super Players, or strangest perhaps, Super Mario Bros. 2, has the strange distinction of missing out on arriving to America upon its original release. The Lost Levels took the concepts that Mario built and ran with them, far and hard. The game has become infamous for being pretty trolly with tons of hidden blocks in bad places, weird level requirements, and bizarre new mechanics, and as such, Nintendo of America opted to pass on the game, believing it was too difficult for their audience, instead turning Doki Doki Panic into the Super Mario Bros. 2 most people are familiar with. While this information is well known now, it was certainly strange for its time. The game is something of a black sheep, not seeing nearly as much re-release as its predecessor or its successors. The game was originally released for the Japan-exclusive Famicom Disk System, a disc-based add-on for Japan's version of the NES, and would first come to the rest of the world in its remake in Super Mario All-Stars, alongside the first game and the game that replaced it in America. This version would also see re-releases of Super Mario All-Stars plus Super Mario World, also on the Super Nintendo, and Super Mario All-Stars Limited Edition on the Wii and on the Switch's online service. The game would again be remade under the title Super Mario Bros. For Super Players on Super Mario Bros. Deluxe for the Game Boy Color. Since then, it's also seen various ports on top of that, on the GBA exclusively in Japan, and then followed by the Wii Virtual Console, which would mark the first release of the original NES version outside of Japan. Following that, it also reached the Wii U and 3DS Virtual Consoles, and then later still, the Switch's online service. Despite its status as a black sheep, it's also had a few cameos throughout the years, as a masterpiece on Super Smash Bros. For Wii U, as a demo on Amiibo Tap, Nintendo's Greatest Bits, and various challenges on NES Remix 2. In this video, I'm going to cover the three primary versions, the original NES version, the All-Stars version, and the Deluxe version. Super Mario Bros. The Lost Levels is quite literally built on top of the original. The game uses mostly the same graphics with a few new ones, the same engine, and a lot of the same tools. As such, the premise is virtually identical to the originals, although the manual claims it's an alternate dimension. Peach kidnapped, Toads turned into bricks, Bowser bad. I'm going to recommend watching my video on Super Mario Bros. Before proceeding here. The gameplay is so similar that covering it again is pretty redundant. Instead, I'll cover the major changes to the gameplay, as that's where the game shines. The basic gameplay is still as good as ever, but there are a few new toys in the Lost Levels toy box. The biggest change is Mario's bounce height off enemies. In Super Mario Bros., Mario will limply fall to the ground after defeating an enemy, but surprisingly, this was the game that changed that, giving Mario a large boost when defeating enemies, which is used frequently in levels for basic progression. Most modern Mario games carry this change over, as it opens a lot more options up to the game. The two-player mode has been removed, instead allowing the player to choose to play Luigi mode in its place. In this mode, the player plays as Luigi, who has a completely new playstyle. The Lost Levels is actually the genesis of Luigi's higher jump and lower traction that most Mario games have given him since, although Lost Levels, like everything it does, takes it to the extreme. Luigi's jump height improvement isn't slight, he goes really fucking high, and hot damn, his traction is so low the entire game might as well be ice levels. He's borderline uncontrollable. Enemies now are less limited due to the experimental nature of the game. Bloopers can appear above the water, and Lakitus and Koopas below. Some Hammer Bros also have a new AI package that causes them to charge a Mario on sight. On top of these changes, there's even a few new enemies. Poison mushrooms can be found in blocks and act like super mushrooms, traveling across the screen until they fall off or hit a wall in reverse. And piranha plants have a new variant, red piranha plants, which are faster and more aggressive, and only stop appearing from pipes while Mario is above the pipe, not while he's adjacent to it. There's also a few new obstacles, backwards warp pipes that send Mario to earlier levels, wind that pushes Mario along constantly, which is sometimes needed to clear large gaps, and green springs, which launch Mario so high that he goes above the screen, which are hilarious but also tend to be necessary for progression. The game is much more difficult than the original. It seems as though three things happened simultaneously during the development of the Lost Levels. Firstly, as at the time testing was done by the designers got very good at the original game and thus designed the second game for their skill level. Secondly, there was obviously a lot more freedom with this game's development, if not just a higher budget and pre-built engine. And thirdly, the team just had fun making the game weird and mean. Despite the difficulty and some obviously cheap shit like trolly invisible blocks, I think the level design is generally more well thought out than the original game, as there's far less reuse and the expanded amount of tools allows the difficulty to be in creative level design rather than walls of bullshit enemies, even though there's still times where that complaint applies. While the aesthetic of the game is almost identical and most of the stuff I said in the Super Mario Bros. Video still applies, this game does feature some improvements, mostly due to having more space on the Famicom Disk System. The backgrounds have added detail, including some shading, mushrooms gain eyes, a change that would also stick. There's all new cloud platforms in a couple levels, and there's additional sound effects and even slight tweaks to the music, like the ending theme. Again, the section on levels will mostly cover interesting stuff for the sake of brevity, starting with World 1 begins with a level that, much like the original game, teaches the player through experience, although it does so with the expectations of them having played the original. Right away, the level has a box of brick blocks with a Koopa in it that has a mushroom in one box, forcing the player to bounce it out, which is a fun little challenge. One of the first question mark blocks in the game has a poison mushroom, which will almost immediately be turned around at a wall, which can trap Mario if he's moved forward too much, teaching a quick and harsh lesson to be careful. World 1-2, the underground level, can be cheesed by running along the top like most underground levels, but uniquely it has 2 warp zones. There's an entire hidden section of the level that leads to World 3, while the one behind the level end pipe leads to World 2. World 1-3 introduces above ground bloopers, which act like they do underwater, but they can be jumped on like any other enemy. Things are fairly normal here, although a bit more difficult than the first game, but they get weirder from here. World 2-1 is a super spring level, requiring Mario to make massive jumps between springs that are incredibly far apart. This level format is used a couple more times, and it's great, stupid fun, though the rest of the world is fairly basic. The third world's first level has a backwards warp pipe to 1-1. The infamy of these backwards warp pipes are mostly what led me to not explore too much, knowing it was possible to accidentally end up worse than before. 3-3 is snow themed with white ground tiles, which doesn't change how the level plays, but it is a nice touch, and the world's castle has the game's first maze. Notable as it's supposed to be done as small Mario, although big Mario can squeeze by with really careful crouch hops. While World 4 is fairly straightforward, the third level requires bouncing off flying Koopas to progress, which becomes pretty standard in this game, but also in later games in the series. World 5's first level introduces wind, which, as stated previously, constantly pushes Mario right, and he'll need to jump with the wind across some huge gaps. The level also requires finding hidden blocks to move on, which is another common tactic in this game. Most dead ends have hidden blocks to escape them. 5-2 has the first level with consecutive columns of falling lifts, which are a fun challenge, but due to not loading until they're actually seen on screen, they can sometimes spawn in impossible patterns. 5-3 is a non-castle maze. There's a lift that moves sideways and carries Mario, and the stage eventually loops. To escape, he needs to bounce off the 2 paratroopas and go down the pipe. Unlike the first game, the level design, while harsh, continues to innovate in the later half, while presenting tons of cool new ideas and challenges, and having actual level designs instead of walls of enemies. World 6 is pretty much more of the same. The second level of World 7 requires Mario to bounce off a paratrooper to reach a pipe to escape a loop again. Not unique, but still, I like this kind of level design. It's kinda like an early version of the ghost houses that later games would use. 7-3 is nothing but super springs. I still find these levels just super fun. The castle also has a segment with 5 columns of descending lifts, which again can get painfully desynchronized. In World 8, Hammer Bros will now pretty aggressively chase down Mario on sight, although this doesn't actually make them much harder, as it makes them vulnerable to being baited into pits. 8-2 requires doing a running jump into a spring, which is pretty tricky, and has a necessary hidden exit to escape the loop. A hidden vine in a block that needs to be hit by bouncing off a flying Koopa without falling down the pit it's above. The final level is a maze, but it also has a weird unique boss. Before reaching Bowser, Mario runs into a weird blue Bowser that the manual refers to as Bowser's brother. It's really bizarre, and apparently a result of Bowser's palate breaking due to the distance from the axe. Bowser's brother is a deep cut in the Mario iceberg, and it's hard not to laugh at the weirdness of this one-off character that was even removed in Super Mario All-Stars. After beating Bowser and his brother, Mario saves Peach and gets a kiss. The Lost Levels lacks a hard mode, instead the game will simply loop after beating it, although only if Mario took a level warp. If he didn't, Mario unlocks a bonus world, World 9, also known as Fantasy World. Fantasy World is really fucking weird. The whole world seems like it was kinda made as a joke and a reward for players. The levels are incredibly bizarre and awkward, and have intentionally broken palettes that give them a weird glitchy feel. 9-1 is laid out like a regular overworld level, but takes place underwater. The level is incredibly easy as Mario can just swim above everything. 9-2 is similar, but composed almost entirely of pipes with red piranha plants in them. 9-3 is perhaps the game's most bizarre level. It has no enemies, only one pit, and the only obstacle is the return of Bowser's brother, who can easily be avoided by running above the level. 9-4 is a really straightforward and short water level. It has various enemies, although Mario can swim above all of them, and its only unique aspect is Japanese characters spelling out "thank you." At this point, World 9 loops. Despite this, there's also another set of hidden worlds, but their unlock requirements are pretty fucking silly. In order to get to worlds A, B, C, and D, Mario needs to clear World 8 while taking at least one warp zone, as World 9 just loops itself over and over again. Not only that, but he must do this 8 times in a row without using continues. It's ridiculous. So much so that I didn't bother, although I did play them in All-Stars where the requirements are far more reasonable. It's also worth noting that Mario's lives are reset to 1, and he can't continue from these worlds, making it even more ridiculous. For the sake of clarity, even though I only beat them in the All-Stars version, I'll talk about them here. So, are they worth 8 full playthroughs? Not particularly. They're fairly standard The Lost Level levels. World A has a warp zone to World C in A3, and the level itself mixes wind, jumping, cheap cheeps, and paratroopa jumps, but even the castle, which, while challenging, is pretty standard. World B has a warp zone in its castle to World D that bypasses Bowser. Otherwise, you know, it's a fine set of levels, but more of the same. C2 and C3 are more Super Spring levels, which I like. C4 is a slightly altered version of 7-4 because they decided to pull out the old bag of tricks from the first game when making the end of this one, I guess. World D's third level has way too many bullet bills, becoming eerily reminiscent of the first game's worst parts. Even the final level, although kinda cool for being really long, is pretty standard. After beating it, Mario gets another kiss and the game ends. Like I said, it's definitely not worth 8 playthroughs. Super Mario Bros. Lost Levels has a pretty tattered legacy. Unlike its predecessor, the game has been somewhat tossed aside, with Nintendo trying to distance themselves from the very outset due to its difficulty. It would see a little bit of return later. Luigi's physics would eventually become standard for him, although less extreme than in this game, obviously. Poison mushrooms would appear in Smash Bros, as well as 3D Land and Mario Maker. That said, The Lost Levels' truest legacy will be its history being tossed aside and forgotten. It is worth noting, though, that a lot of fan games, especially in the Kaizo sub-series, which are fan ROM hacks that tend towards having extreme precision and difficulty, would take after The Lost Level, featuring trolly and difficult level designs. Super Mario Bros. The Lost Level is a good game, and I think it tends to have much stronger level design than the first game, with more tools available and emphasis on tough platforming as opposed to walls of enemies. It's fun and well made, but it is pretty fucking hard. Most people are going to be turned off by its cruelty, especially in the NES version, but I honestly think it's better than the original, and it's worth a try for people who like how the first game feels, as I feel like it's got much stronger design. Alongside the remake of the first game, Super Mario Bros. The Lost Levels would also be remade for Super Mario All-Stars. Like the first game, it would be changed the most as compared to the second and third games. Most of the changes I covered in the video on the first game would be carried over, including making the graphics identical, the physics changes, and updating the music. There are also a few other changes unique to the Lost Levels remake, such as World 9 having its palette fixed, which does kinda harm how cool and weird it looked. Due to its difficulty, the game can be saved at any time, and like Deluxe, the player can start from the start of any level, even on Game Over. Luigi's physics have been touched up, the same as Mario's have, they've been tightened, so while he does have higher traction than Mario, he's a fair bit more controllable than his NES version, and since his jump height is still absolutely ridiculous, for some players they might find him as kind of an easy mode, although his traction still is a little bit higher than Mario's. Worlds A through D always come after World 8 or World 9, depending which the player gets, without needing to suffer through the game 8 times, and in Worlds A through D, like the original game's hard mode, Goombas are replaced by Buzzy Beetles. Unfortunately, whereas I said the All-Star version's revamped physics made the game easier, and most people would like it better, the slower acceleration makes the Lost Levels a fair bit harder on the Super Nintendo, as the jumps are very precise and All-Star Mario needs more time to actually get to speed. Despite the relaxing on difficulty with being able to start at the front of a level on Game Over, and the great change of making Worlds A to D accessible, despite the fact that they aren't that worth it, it's probably not the best version as there's so many small moments that are broken by the All-Stars physics. This can be slightly remedied by playing Luigi just because his jump height is so absurdly high that it kind of bypasses this issue in some places. Like before, All-Stars is a decent way to try the Lost Levels, and I think it's still probably the way to go for most people. Like before, All-Stars is a decent way to play the Lost Levels, and I think it might still be the way to go for most people as a lot of the changes are for the better on the accessibility end, but the physics do harm it in some small ways, so I'd say it's technically the inferior version, although it is the more accessible version. Regardless, it's still a good way to play a pretty good game though. As for the deluxe version of the Lost Levels, which is called Super Mario Bros. For Super Players in-game, I intended and tried to play it, but holy hell. I had a bad enough time with the deluxe version of the first game, so grinding out 300,000 points without game overing in it to unlock the last level's remake was just too painful. Even the person who owned the game before me, someone named Kara who was capable of beating the game and the hard mode, which I wasn't capable of doing, hadn't unlocked the lost levels. I discussed the original game's remake on Deluxe in my previous video, but the screen size is a major issue. Given that even on the NES and Super Nintendo lost levels is pretty rough and requires some blind jumps, I have no doubt it's probably a bad way to play the game. As far as changes, everything that changed in the first game listed in the previous video is applied here. Plus the bonus worlds, 9, A, B, C, and D are cut entirely. The Game Boy also apparently couldn't handle the wind physics, and as such, levels that used that have been slightly changed to accommodate this. Too bad they couldn't make more adjustments to make the game more suited for Game Boy. Super Mario Bros. Lost level is really harsh, but at the same time, it seems so purposefully and cleverly. It's fun to try and then get the hard parts just right, and the level design is clever, more so than the original game, I'd say. While it may be a bit too mean for most people, especially on the NES where players will be sent back far more, and where the bonus worlds are basically impossible to get to, I'd say it's generally a pretty good game. It's a well-made platformer, it's just one that's incredibly unforgiving. The Super Nintendo version is far more forgiving and accessible. I think the lost levels is actually super cool and worth giving a few shots. Maybe in short bursts though, because it can be a bit harsh.